Hi, everyone. My name is Connelly, and I'm very excited to be with you today to talk about how you can create impact in an exponential world. So, I want to start this off by sharing with you a picture of my very first office. So, when I graduated my MBA, I knew I wanted to create impact. And so, I joined an international aid organization. I moved to Central African Republic, and we were working on a pediatric malnutrition and malaria program. And every day we helped dozens upon dozens of people. But at the end of every day, there was always a really long line of people that we just couldn't get to. And so when I finished my project and came back to Canada, where I'm from, I asked all of my colleagues, I said, how can we create more impact? And most of the answers they said were raise more money, hire more people, and open more projects. And so that's what I did. I joined the fundraising team. I started raising more money. We were opening more projects, and the growth of our organization looked a little bit like this. And it really was the beginning of my social impact journey and trying to figure out what was the best way that I could create change in the world around me. And it got me to thinking about what it meant to create social impact. And I put together this definition for myself. It says, social impact is to actively do good things or prevent bad things so all creatures, near and far, can lead better lives now and in the future. So if we break this down a little bit, it's really this idea of being active. So it's not just enough to not do bad things. You have to actively be doing something good or preventing something bad from happening. The next part is this concept of all creatures. So that could be humans, animals, the planet, or as we increasingly move into a digital age, these creatures might be living, they might be digital, they might be creatures on another planet. Near and far, so same concept. You can create social impact right where you live, or you can create it halfway around the world, and can lead better lives now and in the future. So you can create actions that will have an impact on people today, or you can create actions that are going to have an impact, in 10 years or 20 years. And all of these ways of operating are great ways to create social impact. The key piece is to find something that you're passionate about, so that you can be excited about the work that you're doing. But one thing that I learned as I was going through this was this incredible thing called the seventh generation principle from Canada's First Nations community called the Iroquois. And they said that in our every deliberation, we must consider the impact of our decisions on the next 7 generations. So no matter what you're doing or what you're working on, we need to be thinking with the idea in mind of how our actions are going to impact generations that we will never meet. So if you want to start on your own social impact journey, the first step really is to find a problem that you really care about. And if you don't have one in mind, I highly recommend checking out the UN Sustainable Development Goals. So these are essentially 17 goals that the international community has come together to create and define as being critical areas in the world that we want to create change in. So there's everything from gender equality to industry and innovation to life on land. So let's take a look at a few organizations that are creating change against some of these SDGs. And the first one I want to talk about is the World Food Program. So every year they help feed more than 153 million people who are facing hunger. And so they're tackling SDG number 2. And they're creating some really incredible change in the world. But they're also an enormous global organization. So you don't need to be a huge organization to create change. There's an organization out of the UK called Legs for Africa that's trying to tackle SDGs number 3, good health and well-being, and number 12, responsible consumption and production. Now, across Africa, there's more than 1.7 million people that need access to prosthetic limbs. But because the cost of those can be upwards of $5,000, it's just not it's not accessible to the vast majority of people. So what they're doing is they're taking limbs from the UK and Canada and Australia, disassembling them, sending them down to clinics across the continent, and having people be able to access them there. So let's take a look at what they're doing.
Legs for Africa. Sometimes I gave them the name My Heroes. They are a non-profit charity organization who are shipping protective components to different countries in Africa, helping amputees to be on their feet and walk. After their treatment, they have the opportunity to come to the mobility center here and get a prosthetic leg.
My name is Gabriel and I work for the Department of Social Welfare and I work in disability. Once the patient comes in, you see a sign of hopelessness in the person because now they are thinking, I have lost a leg. Is it possible for me to walk again? I mean, what happens to my family? Here at the Mobility Center, we don't only give prostheses, but we also do some psychological counseling, and then we show them somebody that wears a prosthesis, and that gives them hope.
So that's incredible, right? Not only are they helping the individuals, but they're also helping their families. And so far, they've reached over 14,000 people. Now, you don't even need to be an organization to create change. This is the story of a man named Byron Roman, who essentially challenged bored teenagers to take before and after photos of an area in their community that they cleaned up and hashtag it with the word trash tag and post it on social media. And once he did this, this took off like wildfire. There's all sorts of incredible photos all across the world of people cleaning up little areas around them, doing a little before and after. This photo is blurry, but it's my favorite one. So you can see just the impact on the community that children are now able to play on this beautiful beach. Now, this essentially movement that was created has now had more than 50 million posts online and more than 5 million monthly active users, which is, I think, is really incredible. But you don't even need to be a movement to create change. This is the story of Jadav Payeng, who's the forest man of India, and he's tackling SDG number 13, climate action. So let's take a look at his story.
Jadav is a 60-year-old farmer. He has a family of 5 and he lives in a modest home in northern India. But next to his home, he saw trees were dying. The river was flooding, the animals were fleeing, and the land was disappearing. He saw deforestation. But instead of doing nothing, this farmer did something very simple. He planted a tree. Every day, he cut a branch from his trees, walked for 20 minutes, took a boat, crossed a river, and walked for 2 hours more to get to an empty piece of land with nothing in it and planted a tree. This is amazing! He did that day after day after day for 3 months a year, year after year, for 40 years, until his trees turned into a forest. A real, green, beautiful forest that went from this to this.
So his forest is now larger than Central Park in New York City. In fact, there's a whole herd of elephants that has come through. The ecosystem has completely changed just as a result of this one individual man. And he really feels that he's set an example for what one man can do to try to change the world. The message I really want you to get from this is this idea that everyone can create impact. The question really is just how. And one of the first ways that people think about creating change is, of course, this idea of philanthropy. This is Chuck Feeney, who's one of the world's most prolific philanthropists. They call him the James Bond of philanthropy because he essentially pledged to give away 99% of his wealth while he was still alive. But he did it almost completely anonymously. And in all of his years of giving, he gave away over $8 billion, which is pretty incredible. So he's created some really wonderful change in the world. Now, pledging to give away all of your money, I think, is great. But the model that I prefer most is actually this concept of pledging to solve a problem in your lifetime. And that's what Jimmy Carter and the Carter Foundation did. They pledged to solve a problem. They pledged to solve the problem of guinea worm. which was a really big problem across the continent of Africa. And when they started, there were over 1 million recorded cases of guinea worm, but probably closer to 3 million. And by the time they finished, essentially last year, there were 15 cases. And this year so far, only 4. And so by pledging to solve a problem, the way that you fund things and the types of things that you fund are completely different because your goal is not just to make a dent in a problem, it's what do we have to do to make this problem completely disappear? Now, one of the ways that people often overlook when it comes to social impact is the idea of business. In fact, the SDGs are a $12 trillion business opportunity. So you may be able to start a company that changes the world and find yourself on the list of the $100 billion club with Elon Musk and Jeff Bezos. But maybe what we need to really think about is the idea of what it means to be a billionaire and change from the idea that a billionaire is someone who has $1 billion to one that a billionaire is someone who impacts the lives of over 1 billion people. So I want to come back to this story of my organization. So we were raising money, we were opening more projects, and we were trucking along. And then I saw a statistic that changed the way I think about everything. And it's this, that by 2050, climate change will cause the migration of over 1 billion people. Now, this is because of famine, lack of water, floods, storms, climate just getting too hot or too cold, and the conflict that comes as a result of that. Now, if you think about the number of people who fled Ukraine, it was about 12 million. So when you think about 1 billion people, that's an enormous amount of people. And so what I did was I took that statistic and I graphed it against the number of people that we were working with today. And all of a sudden, this plan to raise more money and open more projects just wasn't feasible anymore. It was never going to be good enough. And so the question transformed from being, how do we create more impact, to being, how can we create 10 times more impact? And the answer really came down to thinking exponentially. And this idea of exponentials goes back to Moore's law, which I'm sure you've probably heard of before, but it's essentially that you could plot the number of transistors on a microchip growing or essentially doubling about every 18 months. And you could predict that with almost perfect certainty over time, which is pretty incredible. So you can see it here on a logarithmic scale, but if you look at it on a sort of normal scale, you can see that exponential curve and how essentially, as it grows, it grows in this incredible pattern where it just explodes what it seems like overnight, even though it's over a really long period of time. Now, humans really have this tendency to think on a linear scale. So we think things are going to get a little bit better every year and keep going. But the reality is technology grows exponentially. And so we need to be able to think and predict the way technology is going to grow to be able to actually use exponential technology in the creation of impact around us. And one of the ways to spot some of these exponential trends is to use a framework called the 6 Ds of exponential technology. And that's digitize, deceptive, disruptive, dematerialize, demonetize, and democratize. And I'm going to walk you through what each of these means. So let's go back again to the example of my organization. So the first step to essentially these 6 Ds, this growing exponentially, is to digitize. So if you wanted to digitize an international health program, one of the ways you could do that is by using telemedicine. So instead of having doctors flying all around the world, going to insecure locations, you just set up these telemedicine units in clinics all over the world. People don't have to travel as far. It's a lot easier. They might be able to see a doctor 24 hours a day. So there's a lot of benefits to that, right? So we're going to drop this telemedicine here as our first D. Now, the way this chart works is essentially that line on the top is what we have today. So that would be flying doctors all over the world. And the line on the bottom is the new technology we're rolling out. So in this case, telemedicine. Now, the second D is deceptive. Exponential technologies are deceptive because at the beginning, they really don't seem like they're actually very good, right? And so you can see here our telemedicine program, it's just not that effective at the beginning. And it gets this idea that it's never going to be as good as a real doctor. And so teams don't incorporate it, they don't champion it. It sort of becomes this thing where people don't really believe in what it's doing. But then the quality of it grows over time, right? And telemedicine gets better. Maybe the bandwidth gets better. People are able to access doctors in a whole new way. And what it fundamentally does is it completely disrupts the way we actually provide care. And so instead of, again, flying these doctors all over the world, people can get care wherever they are, right? They can get it close to home. They might be able to see a specialist that speaks their language or someone that, has a unique capabilities in whatever disease it is that they're dealing with. And so it shifts everything from being about, flying people overseas to having people being able to access doctors right, in their own communities. And that increases access to medical care for everyone, which is incredible. Now, the next D is this dematerialize. So how do we take the physical nature out of this process? And in the case of telemedicine, what you could do is get rid of those bulky units inside the clinics and have the doctor on the phone. Now, Amazon Prime has just launched this. It's an application called One Medical, where you can access your doctor wherever you are on your cell phone. So imagine those billion people that are going to migrate from their homes are now going to be able to take their doctor with them, or they could see their doctor right from their home instead of having to go to the clinic. And they're going to have this incredible continuity of care because they can access their doctor here. Now, the next D that we talk about is demonetize. So then we start to incorporate artificial intelligence into this process, where you've now got an artificial AI or an AI doctor, as opposed to a human being that's read every single medical journal that's ever been written and has access to all of the medical data from hospitals all over the world and is able to diagnose and treat and prescribe in a way that, essentially costs no money because it's just an AI. It's not a human being. And the final part is democratize. So as a result of this, we are able to treat 10 times the number of patients for 10 times less cost. And so we have democratized access to healthcare in a way that never would have been possible if we were still trying to fly doctors from one country to another. Now, the World Health Organization is looking into this. They have something incredible called Florence. Florence is their digital health assistant. So let's take a look at Florence and what she can do.
Hi, I'm Florence, and it's so nice to meet you. Human health is my specialty, and I want everyone to live a healthier life. There is so much we can talk about, from tobacco products and alcohol, to healthy living and mental health. I can also share information about COVID-19 vaccines. Is there something specific you'd like to talk about, or would like to know a bit more about me? I'm so glad you chose this topic. Mental health is a key part of our overall health. When we feel mentally well, we can work productively, enjoy our free time, and contribute actively to our communities.
So what do you think of Florence? She's pretty terrible, right? Like when I saw this video, I was like, oh, I can't show this video. It's not good enough. Like she's just like, no one's going to use this. But I got caught in that deceptive phase, right? I looked at Florence for what she could do today and not for what she could do down the road. And so the next step to Florence is a company out of New Zealand called Soul Machines that's also building an AI-based health assistant. So let's take a look at Dr. Nolan from New Zealand.
Hi, I'm Nolan, your go-to digital health advisor. We can talk about your health and well-being, and I'll try to keep you well-informed and at ease. Do you have a health goal or condition you'd like more information or advice on? Tell me a bit about yourself, and I'll do my best to help.
Hi, Dr. Nolan. I'd like to get my diabetes under control. What can I do?
It's great that you want to take control of your diabetes. Focus on eating balanced meals, staying active, and regularly monitoring your blood sugar levels. It's also important to work closely with your healthcare team for personalized guidance.
Okay, so Dr. Nolan, like definitely an improvement on Florence is pretty cool. But I want you to imagine what Dr. Nolan might look like 5 years from now when the quality of a digital AI health assistant goes way up that exponential curve. And I think there might look a little bit like this.
I am not Morgan Freeman, and what you see is not real. Well, at least in contemporary terms, it is not. What if I were to tell you that I am not even a human being? Would you believe me? What is your perception of reality? Is it the ability to capture, process, and make sense of the information our senses receive? If you can see, hear, taste, or smell something, does that make it real? Or is it simply the ability to feel? I would like to welcome you to the era of synthetic reality. Now, what do you see?
Okay, so now you imagine that your AI doctor looks like Morgan Freeman. He's virtually indistinguishable from a real human being, but he has all the knowledge of every medical journal in the world and every piece of health data in the world. And suddenly it seems like something that's much more realistic and much more valuable, right? So let's take a look at a few organizations that are incorporating exponential technologies into what they're doing. And the first one I want to talk about is actually going back to the story of the World Food Program. So one of the things that they realized was that most people facing hunger were not actually facing a lack of food. They were facing a lack of money available to buy the food available. And so when they were flooding the market with free food, they were actually destroying all of the pre-existing food infrastructure, making the community much more vulnerable as they move forward. So what they started to do was to move to a system of cash transfers. But transferring micro transfers of cash to hundreds of thousands or millions of people is very difficult. And so what they ended up doing was incorporating cryptocurrencies. So they would make transfers of crypto to all of the people, and then they would spend that crypto at local retailers who would then convert it back to local currency from the World Food Program. Now, they've rolled this out across 4 different refugee camps, and they've helped over 4 million people every month. But the statistic I find most interesting here is that in addition to it just being a much better way to run their projects, they've saved $3 million alone just in bank fees. That's incredible, right? So now let's move on. We remember the case of Legs for Africa. This is a company called Instalim out of Japan. They're 3D printing prosthetic limbs. And so because they're using this technology, they're able to drop the cost from being about $5,000 down to being about $400. But the really cool thing about this too is that they can print these legs in about 24 hours. So someone can have a new leg and start working on their new walking within, a day or two, meaning that they will be able to get back on their feet without having all their muscles atrophy. So it's really good, not only for cost, but also for the medical care of the patient using the leg. Now, we talked about Trash Tag. This is a company called Amp Robotics out of the United States, and they're using AI and robotics to help keep recyclables out of the garbage. So let's take a look at what they're doing.
In front of the robot, we have a vision system, and it's looking down at the conveyor belt. That video feed goes to a computer. The computer actually does the identification and says, okay, that's a bottle, that's a can. It then uses that information to send commands to the robot, and the robot says, okay, the vision system saw a can, that's coming at me. It'll be within my range in 1 or 2 seconds, so I'll be ready to pick. The robot has a vacuum gripping system. It's gonna reach out to the aluminum can, pick it up, and then throws it into a trash can or a bunker, and then it's on to the next piece of material. In a typical recycling facility, you might have 1 to 2 dozen people sorting material or doing some kind of work. Our robots can automate roughly 3/4 of those different sorting tasks.
So 3/4 of those jobs would get automated. And on one hand, you have to think, okay, what does that mean for those people? We're going to have to retrain them, find them new work. The other hand is like, man, we probably don't really want people doing this type of dangerous and uninteresting job if we can find something else for them to do. So pretty cool. Now, the last one I want to show you is a company out of Australia that has a project in South Africa where they're using drones to plant trees. So let's take a look at what they're up to.
AC Technologies have developed technology that can plant trees with drone. And how do we do it? With a seed pod.
We're taking off-the-shelf drone technology, and then we have developed a payload system, which is a delivery system for taking these pods and putting them into the ground. The software that we use allows us to fly autonomously, and every time we plant a tree, we are able to log a GPS position when we fire it into the ground. That allows us to come back at a later date, fly the same route, map the same route, and we can quantify the success of every single tree that we plant.
By making use of a pneumatic firing system, we can plant 2 tree seeds per second, and approximately 40,000 trees a day with a team of 2 people. By using a technique called swarming, one pilot can fly up to 5 drones at the same time. It's better and more effective than conventional manual planting. A normal tree planter can do 800 trees per day. We can do 40,000 seeds per day.
So the neat thing about this is that those seed pods have an 80% germination rate. So when you think about 40,000 seeds per day compared to one man planting trees over the course of 40 years, you can see how this exponential technology essentially will help you create 10 times more impact. So I want to come back now to this example of my organization, and I want you to think about if they were to launch a telemedicine program today, within 5 years, where would they be along this chart? Where do you think they would be within 5 years if they launched something today? So many of you might think it would be democratize or maybe disrupt, but I think they would be here. And the reason I think that is this. They will never get over the idea that it will never be as good as a real doctor. Now, some other organization will. Some other organization will launch. They'll have a great international health program. And my organization will be left in the dust because they didn't invest in it. They didn't train in it. They didn't, really rethink the model of how they operated as a result. And so they're going to get left behind. And that's because you can have all the greatest technology in the world, but if you don't have an exponential mindset, then that technology is going to sit on a shelf. So what does it mean to think exponentially? The first part is you have to think big. So start thinking about 10x improvement instead of 10% improvement. The next piece is challenging the status quo. So really think about what is the original problem we were trying to solve? Not so much how do we take what we have and make it better, but what were we really trying to achieve in the first place? And how could we achieve that maybe in a whole new way? The next piece is use the technology you're going to have 5 years from now instead of the technology you have today. So build Florence knowing that Morgan Freeman is coming down the line and he'll be ready once you're ready to roll out. And finally, you have to have inspirational leadership. You need to be the driver of this change. Otherwise, it's not going to happen. So we have looked at a couple of really cool examples of like nimble organizations that are adopting some of this technology. And you might say, well, we're a big old organization, like we can't change. But I want to share with you the story of a company that's kind of big and ordinary, and it's not a company that you would think about being really great in terms of exponential change. And that company makes carpet tiles. So those squares of carpet that you see in conference centers, they're called Interface. And Interface's story starts back in 1994 when the CEO was essentially approached by some of his staff that said, we want you to present an environmental vision. How are we going to change our practices to help support the efforts around climate change? And he just said, he had never even thought about it. He'd never thought about climate change. He'd never thought about having an environmental vision, and he didn't know what to say. He didn't want to have to make a speech about this. But then he read a book that essentially had this quotation in it that said, we are about to experience the death of life. And it changed the way he thought about everything. He said, if we cannot make carpet tiles in a sustainable fashion, then maybe we shouldn't be making them at all. And so he set this incredible mission called Mission Zero, where they were going to have zero negative impact on the planet by 2020. And so they started internally. They started looking at all their production facilities. They put green roofs or solar panels on them. They started collecting rainwater, but then they went up their supply chain to see, if they could only buy from more sustainable suppliers or encourage their existing suppliers to become more sustainable. And then they actually took their learnings and went out to their competitors and said, hey, look at what we've learned. You guys should all operate this way, which is pretty incredible. So let's take a look at how that worked out for Interface as a company.
Thanks. When we started on sustainability as a company, most of these products had a significant impact on the planet. We wasted a lot of resources. We recycled nothing, and they had a carbon footprint that we had never even measured or understood. Interface became inspired to take the company in a more sustainable direction. We took our product design team out in the forest and asked, how would nature design a floor? What lessons could nature give us about moving away from adhesives in our business? And that led to an exploration of Gecko's feet that allowed us to design an innovation that took the company off glue and really helped us build a whole new business by being inspired by nature. We did things to reduce waste. We've swapped out less sustainable materials for recycled and bio-based materials. And so over 20 years, we've been able to innovate and create something that actually stores more carbon than it emits, has a net benefit to the environment.
I mean, that's pretty incredible for a carpet company. So you can see their results. 76% of the energy they use is renewable. 50% of the materials are bio-based. They've reduced their waste to landfills by 85%. Like, these statistics are pretty meaningful. And they're still continuing on today with this incredible change. So they have a new mission. It is creating a climate fit for life. A carpet company. But when you read that, you're like, man, I want to be a part of whatever it is they're doing, because this is incredible, right? Most companies will have a mission statement like this one. Our goal is to provide the highest level of service, the broadest selection of products, and the most competitive prices. Womp womp. Like, who wants to go work overtime for this company on a Saturday? Certainly not me. And so today I want to introduce you to something that's kind of like a mission statement, but takes it much further. And that's the idea of a massive transformative purpose. And what that is essentially is like a vision or mission statement will get you to the end of that linear thinking, right? That 10% improvement type thinking. The massive transformative purpose is truly exponential. So let's break it down. The first piece is that it's massive. It is audaciously big. It's something that's so big, you're never actually going to achieve it. But at the same time, it inspires you to still try. Now, the second part is it's transformative. So it prevents this very different future than the one that you initially would have thought. There's significant change as a part of this MTP. And the last part is purpose. So it reaches the hearts and minds of readers, but makes every single person a part of that change. So let's take a look at a few examples of MTPs. First one is from Boston Children's Hospital. Until every child is well. So that is so enormous. You know it's not possible. But you also know that every nurse, every volunteer, every parent, every person that comes through that hospital is going to show up every day until every child is well. Next is St. Margaret School for Girls, a school where every girl who wants to change the world becomes a woman who does. Think about the transformation there. Imagining these girls with pigtails walking through the front door and walking out 4 years later as the president of the United States or some, incredible CEO. And you want to be a part of that change. You want to help those girls on their journey to get to where they're going. Now, finally, Harley Davidson. More than building machines, we stand for the timeless pursuit of adventure, freedom for the soul. Incredible, right? Freedom for the soul. You know that even in a world where, we can't have motorcycles or whatever it is, that company's going to be fine because it's about something so much bigger than just having, these motorcycles you can ride on. It's about community. It's about that sense of being free. And so I want you to really think about your organization, but also yourself, right? And think about your own massive transformative purpose. So what problems do you care about solving? What time frame do you want to work in? Who are you helping? And how are you going to create that impact? So start to imagine a massive transformative purpose that would encompass all of these pieces and help to inspire the teams and the people that you work with all around you every day. And so if we start to think about this again, how do you go back? How do you start that impact journey? And I want to leave you with a final message that's this, that find something that you would die for and live for it. So thank you very much for joining me today. You can find me at annconnelly.ca or on LinkedIn or Twitter. And I'm just thrilled to be able to share all these ideas of exponential thinking with you. So take care, everybody.